Welcome to another episode of the Mighty Finland podcast, a podcast on all things military from the high north. My name is Ville, and at the beginning of June, I attended the Summer School of Rhetoric, an event that combines security and communications. And there I had the chance to interview two very interesting people. First up was Admiral Rob Bauer, the previous chair of NATO's military committee. With him, we discussed NATO today, what Finland's accession to NATO looked like to him, as well as what the future holds for NATO. Admiral Bauer actually retired 1st of June, so this was his first interview having retired. Now, the military committee is formed by the chief of defenses of the member countries, and it advises on decisions made in the North Atlantic Council, which is where the heads of the member states come together and make decisions as NATO. Let's check it out. All right, we're talking about NATO and Finland. I'm sitting here with Admiral Rob Bauer. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
So I think it was yesterday that we heard about that NATO wants the countries to spend 5% on not only military but all of security. What's your thinking on that the percentage is being risen to that?
Yeah, so when the decision was taken in Vilnius to go to a minimum of 2% of spending on defense, we basically knew at the time, this is summer 2023, that we needed more money, but the nations couldn't agree on the number. That's why the nations agreed on the minimum of 2%. We knew that because of all the military plans that were made, strategy plans eventually, and the military plans show how many capabilities we need collectively together to make sure that we deter and defend against the two threats that NATO sees, which is Russia and the international terror groups. So in order to be successful in deterring and defending against those two threats, we knew this is the total sum of capabilities in the land domain, maritime domains, air domain, space and cyber that we need as an alliance. And if you picture that as a shield, then basically we knew what we needed in terms of money to make sure that we would get the shield, the sum of all those capabilities. And we knew that the sum of the money we needed was more than the 2%. So now we come to the Hague Summit where basically the decision will be taken what is the new spending level? What are we going to spend on defense to make sure that we actually make those military plans executable, fully executable. And I think that's the 3.5% you now hear the Secretary General talk about. The 1.5% on top of that is money that you need next to or on top of what you spend in the military. So the 3.5% is on military capabilities, is on soldiers, is on military infrastructure, is on bases, air bases, ports, etc. And the 1.5% is, for example, on military mobility, in order to have bridges that can carry tanks, or roads and airports and harbors that actually can make sure that if we fly to another than a military airfield, that you can still work there and use those facilities. So this is on the, let's say, wider resilience of our society, because in many ways we went away from thinking that we were going to be attacked. In the early 90s, we basically thought we will never be attacked again. And the only reason why we still have NATO is primarily to make sure that somewhere else in the world we will have to help other nations to become safer. And that's what we tried to do in Afghanistan and Iraq, etc. And are still doing, for example, in the Balkans, in Kosovo, and now in Iraq with the NATO mission Iraq. So there's still that type of missions ongoing as well, but we have returned to collective defense, because if you have an enemy which might attack you, then you have to be readier than we were in the past. So we need more soldiers at a higher readiness, and those soldiers need the right capabilities, but also ammunition and also spare parts in the right numbers. So we changed from wars of choice in a way, Iraq, Afghanistan, where we decided to go there, to wars of necessity because somebody else might attack you.
And into defending our own territory.
And it's about defending NATO's territory.
Yeah.
And we know we need a number of things that we do not have in sufficient numbers. For example, air defense is a good example.
Right. I'm going to circle back to NATO at the end of the interview, but I want to ask about Finland. I mean, you saw Finland accession to NATO during your time as the chair of the military committee. How was that for you, the expansion of NATO? I mean, that's exciting in a sense, but also how did you feel? What does Finland bring to the table? What are some key benefits?
Well, it's good to reiterate that Finland and Sweden were an operational partner of NATO for many, many years already. Finland and Sweden participated, for example, in the operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. So Finland and Sweden were working very closely militarily with NATO already. Not as an ally, but as a partner. And because of that close relationship, they had a different status than other partners. For example, we were able to exchange classified information with Finland and Sweden. And there's a few other nations with which we can do that as well. So they were further along the line than many other nations. So that's one. So we basically knew that Finland and Sweden were very capable if it comes to the military. The reason I'm convinced that Finland and Sweden changed their minds, because I was in Finland with the North Atlantic Council in November 2021, and I made a joke to both the CHODs, the chiefs of defense. I asked them teasingly, "So when are you becoming a member?" And they looked at me and they said, "Rob, never. That will never happen." And this is November.
Yeah.
And 5 months later, they applied.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was that as a result of the invasion, the full-fledged invasion in Ukraine by Russia, they saw that if you look at the rules-based international order and international law, it's not enough to, let's say, for example, Russia saw that Finland and Sweden had a special position. They were neutral or non-aligned. And in order to be successful, if you are a neutral or non-aligned nation, is that somebody else recognizes that and actually accepts it. Mm. And if you look at the invasion of Ukraine, then everybody could see that Russia didn't live up to the rules any longer, because they invaded a sovereign state with internationally recognized borders. So Finland and Sweden saw that having this status in the international law no longer was sufficient to be secure. And that's why they changed their mind. That's why they applied. And first, I think Finland was more top-down, was a government initiative. But I think in Sweden, for example, it was more bottom-up, where the people basically urged the government to change that position.
Yeah.
And so, if you look at the nations, in terms of geography, we will have to defend as an alliance serious extra territory. Finland and Sweden are both big countries, and Finland borders with Russia, of course, and has a 900-mile border with Russia. But the good news for NATO is that not only we have to, as an alliance, help to defend Finland and Sweden, but they bring very, very capable armed forces, and so it's a good deal in many, many ways.
Right. So the bulk of our It's a good point at the end. The bulk of our force we're in Finland. We're conscription military. We're reservist-based military. We're 5.5 million people, out of which about 1 million are in the reserves. So we can, in that sense, bring a lot to the table. Is it somehow an issue or something? Could it be a problem in your perspective that the Finnish military is based on reservists and not on standing
To
forces?
the contrary, I think if you look at collective defense and the ability to scale as a nation from a core armed forces to a much larger armed forces that is necessary when you are under threat and of course even more when you are attacked, then the ability to scale quickly is something where NATO as an alliance can learn a lot from Finland. Because basically what you can see is within 30 days you can scale up to about 280,000 from a roughly 40,000. And so that is huge. And the 280,000 soldiers are reservists, but you have the gear and everything that those soldiers need available within 30 days. And then if you would scale up to the million, it will take a little bit longer because you have to find gear for them as well. But the ability to basically go from an armed forces and then to a tenfold bigger armed forces is a fantastic thing. And you have this system for a long time, so you know it works. And I think that is something where NATO as an alliance has to look at seriously, and a lot of nations are considering different ways to be able to scale, which is necessary when you have a war. So it's not a negative thing; it's a very positive thing, and I think it's something where a lot of nations can learn from Finland.
It's interesting that was the same what the Secretary General was saying when I spoke to him a couple of months ago, that a lot of our allied nations could look up to our system and learn from that.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a cheap system, and that's why a lot of nations, of course, are hesitant to go back to that. We had those systems. We had systems of conscription also in the Netherlands,
right,
where all the young men would be called up and then serve for a year or 2 years in the armed forces until, let's say, mid-90s. That was the case. We still have the system, but we don't call in the people. But it's a of course, if you have to have the gear for, in your case, 280,000 soldiers, and you have an active service of about 30,000, it is expensive because you have to buy it, you have to maintain the gear, you have to store it, you have to make sure that it is, that it is the latest and greatest gear, etc., etc. So it is not a cheap system, but if you don't have it and a war starts, then you will regret it when you don't have a system like that in place. And that's the discussion that I had with a lot of leaders in the different nations. I know it's basically the inconvenient truth to talk about this, but I think it is necessary. And if we're too late, in collective defense, you're either ready or not. It's black and white. It's not like a scale from you're sort of ready. No, you're not. If you're not ready, then you lose the war.
And then it's even more expensive at that point.
And then it's more expensive because you lose your country, basically.
Yeah, exactly. We're right now in the high north. In the Arctic, it's beautiful and summery outside right now. But how well equipped or skilled or ready would NATO be to warfight in this part of the world?
I would say increasingly. A number of nations over the last decades continued to train and have the equipment for the high north. United States, of course Canada because of its own climate, but in Norway every year the US, the UK, and the Netherlands Marines would train and have long-standing exercises and have the right gear to operate in the high north. So those were that happened and continue to happen for many decades. But I think increasingly other nations will will invest in that as well. But of course, the Arctic nations themselves are increasingly investing in the right capabilities as well.
Right. All right. So, what do the next couple of years look like for NATO? We're sensing a Zeitenwende of sorts. Deterrence has to be built up. How do you see it the next coming years for NATO?
Yeah. So let's assume that the money discussion is finalized in the summit in The Hague. So there will be serious extra money available for investments in or buying the right capabilities. The next step then is that we not only have to find new soldiers, train them and equip them, but also that we have to urge the rest of society to make sure that it actually happens. And that requires a serious discussion with investors because we need a bigger defense industry. We need the defense industry to be able to build the factories. So this is a discussion between the government and the defense industry about the right permits, and you need to have space for the armed forces to exercise. Now in Finland, that's not really a problem. But in the Netherlands, I can assure you that is an issue where a lot of people will have an opinion on more training by noise-making things like tanks and fighter aircraft and helicopters and things like that. So that discussion is ongoing, but it will take a while until, let's say, the whole of society agrees that it is necessary, and not necessarily always nice, but necessary. And I think that is the discussion we need to continue to have. So it's less about the money, but it is about making sure that we can buy the relevant things with that money, and that we find the right number of people and train them to make sure that we have the armed forces that we need.
And with that comes the mindset that has to be that.
And then the mindset in our society as a whole that, yeah, there will be more helicopters and fighter jets flying over, and there's tanks in an exercise area, and there's actually, we need to build more ammunition storage places. And if you look at the circles around those places, then probably they will touch a living area, especially in a country like the Netherlands. So that will lead to discussions on accepting certain levels of risk, and it's no longer a zero-risk society, which we have created over the last 30, 40 years. So all these discussions will happen in the next couple of years. And we need to speed up this because the threat is serious, and the Russians are reconstituting their armed forces. They are producing more than they actually need in Ukraine at the moment. So it is a serious issue. We need to take this very, very seriously.
So is this the conversation around the 5% and the money, is that the main outcome that you expect from the Hague Summit?
The money is one. The other is the capability targets, which is about a rebalancing of what the US brings to NATO and what Europe and Canada bring to NATO. And this is US and this is Europe and Canada, and we need to bring it to this, and maybe a little bit like this in Europe. And so I think that is another very important one, the capability targets, which is basically, I told you about the shield. And if you look at the shield, the capability targets discussion is which part of the shield is provided by which nation. And so that every nation knows what they have to buy, what they have to do to make sure that we together provide a whole working shield.